those procedures as well. I had to take a written test of theory. I had to take a laboratory test and perform a moot court as well.
Now, as a DNA analyst, a forensic scientist 1 or 2, is there any type of continuing education that is required?
Yes, in the DNA laboratory, there is required 8 hours of training in DNA testing every year.
How about proficiency testing?
What about it?
I'm sorry, what is that?
A proficiency test is a test that's administered by an outside agency to test any certified scientist in the DNA laboratory, their ability to accurately generate DNA profiles.
So in addition to that 8 hours of continuing education, there's also proficiency testing, is that right?
That's correct, twice a year.
Okay. And were you, when you were in the DNA lab, the last day that you were there, were you current and successful with all of your proficiency testing?
Yes.
In total, over the course of your career, approximately how many cases have you worked on where you have processed and analyzed DNA samples?
I would say multiple thousand of cases.
When you say, when we're talking about cases, could there be more than one sample that you're testing per case?
That's correct. There could be one item submitted or several items submitted.
Now, how many times have you testified in superior court with regard to the results of the DNA analyses you've conducted?
Approximately 70 times.
And what jurisdictions?
I testified in most of the counties throughout the state of New Jersey.
Now, in those instances, how many times were you qualified by the court as an expert in the field of forensic DNA analysis?
Every time.
Judge, at this time, the state would seek to qualify this witness as an expert in the field of forensic DNA analysis.
Anybody here?
No, Judge, thank you.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I just read it to you this morning. Not well. Forget that. But I'm not going to read it to you again. Obviously, you know the charge as it relates to expert testimony and how you evaluate an expert's testimony here. But I will find this defendant to be an expert in the field of forensic DNA analysis. Prosecutor, go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Sir, what does the term accreditation mean with regard to a forensic lab?
Accreditation is essentially an audit of the laboratory. We have an agency called ANAB that comes out and audits the laboratory, and what they essentially are doing is they are checking that we say what we do and we do what we say, so they're ensuring that we have protocols set in place, that we're following them. We have employees that meet the requirements to be employed by the state of New Jersey as a forensic scientist. They're checking casework, they're interviewing scientists. There's a whole bunch of requirements and standards they check to make sure that we're doing the correct thing.
Now, is your lab accredited?
It is.
Okay, and what is the accrediting agency, if you recall?
The accrediting agency is ANAB.
How many times a year is the lab audited?
We are audited once a year.
Now, we've heard a little bit about how evidence is received initially into the lab. Once evidence is received into the lab, how does it get to you as the DNA analyst?
Evidence first comes to the evidence receiving desk by the submitting agency, where those items are inventoried and barcoded and given a unique laboratory number. Once that is established, assignments are created. Generally, in a DNA case, this evidence will go to the serology unit first, where they'll screen the evidence for potential biological evidence that's suitable for DNA testing. If that is the case, they will then prepare samples for DNA testing. They may go back to the vault or submit it directly to the laboratory. At that point, a DNA assignment will be created, and then a scientist will be assigned that case to work on the evidence where they pick it up from the vault or will it be in the DNA laboratory at that time.
Okay, now as a DNA analyst, what, if anything, did you do to ensure the integrity of evidence? In other words, to prevent contamination, mix-ups, etc.?
Yes, we have an entire quality control procedure we utilize to protect the integrity of evidence. That includes things as wearing protective equipment, a laboratory jacket, face mask, hairnet, gloves. We will clean our surfaces with bleach, water, and ethanol. We have controls during our testing, so we'll have a negative control that is just a blank sample of our reagents we use to ensure that our reagents are clean. We have a positive control to show the testing is working properly. You're getting a result that is expected to be the same every time. We have a review process during our testing, and we have a review process during our case files, so there's a ton of steps we do to ensure that reliability.
Now, what does DNA stand for?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's considered the master molecule of life. It's the genetic material that's located throughout the cells of your body, and it's the same throughout all those cells in your body. So any DNA found in a hair cell will be the same as your DNA found in your skin cell or your blood cell. Your DNA is unique to you, so no two individuals have the same DNA, with the exception of identical twins, and it stays the same throughout your lifetime. Now, your DNA is inherited from your parents, so half your DNA comes from your mother, and the other half is coming from your father's. In your body, your DNA is located in those cells on structures called chromosomes, which are just regions of compacted DNA and protein. We have 23 pairs of chromosomes, half coming from your mother, the other half coming from your father. Now, at a particular location or locus on your chromosome is a gene. A gene is a specific DNA sequence that encodes for a particular function. So, for example, if you take hair color, at a very specific location on one of your chromosomes, you have the gene for hair color, which is a specific sequence. When that is expressed, you get blonde hair, brown hair, black hair, for example. Since you get different colors, you say you have an allele for that gene. So you have that particular location of a particular sequence, and if you have brown hair, you have the brown allele. If you have blonde hair, you have the blonde allele. Now, in the laboratory, when I'm generating DNA profiles, I am not generating profiles of particular traits. I am looking at regions called short tandem repeats. These are short segments of DNA that contain a repeated sequence, and I'm counting the number of repeats you have at several different locations on different chromosomes. So when I generate a profile, you essentially see a set of numbers at several different locations.
Thank you. Now, when we talk about forensic DNA analysis, at its most basic form, is it essentially a forensic tool of comparison?
That's correct.
So just your job, kind of just to summarize it, are you looking at evidence that is taken from a piece of evidence at a scene and developing a DNA profile from that?
Correct.
And then if there's anything to compare it to, any buccal swabs or reference samples, are you then comparing that to the developed DNA profile from the buccal swab?
That's correct.
Now, just a couple of definitions just to define. What is an evidentiary sample?
An evidentiary sample is one where I do not know the source of that DNA, and that could be coming from the scene or comes from maybe a particular person's clothing, that you know the source of that clothing, but I don't know how that DNA got there, so it's considered evidentiary. It's unknown to me at the time.
What about a reference sample?
So a reference sample is one where I know where the source of that DNA profile is coming from, and they usually take the form of a buccal swab, which is essentially a Q-tip swabbing of the inner cheek, or a blood sample.
Now, when a comparison is done between an evidentiary sample and a reference sample, what are the options in terms of the DNA analyst's conclusions?
Yeah, so there's essentially three conclusions I can make when I do my comparisons. The first one could be an exclusion, where the reference material does not match the evidentiary material, so they're not a contributor there. There's an inclusion or a match where the evidentiary profile matches the reference material, or the profile generated from the evidence is inconclusive. There's not enough information for me to make a comparison.
Okay, so when there is an exclusion, does your analysis end there?
It does.
Now, when there's a finding of an inclusion, in other words, that the person of interest is a match to the evidentiary profile, does your analysis end there?
It does not. So once I have a scenario where someone matches, I need to provide some kind of association or strength to that match, and that's when I'll do a statistical analysis to provide a strength to that match.
Okay, so just to be clear, you don't just say that the person is an inclusion or a match. You have to provide some sort of statistic to demonstrate the rarity of that match. Is that right?
That's correct.
What is the statistic that you used back in 2018?
The statistic I used was called a random match probability. So that's the chance that an individually randomly selected from the population of unrelated individual matches that profile of interest.
Could you give us an easy example of that?
Yes. Let's say, for example, I did a comparison and I generated a profile, and that profile then matches the reference material. So I have a match. I decide what I have to do with that match now as my statistic to provide a weight. So let's say, just for example, the stat comes to 1 in a million individuals. So what that is essentially saying, if I had a random population of 1 million people, I would only expect one person to match that profile.
Now, in terms of the reason for providing a statistic, is it fair to say that you can have a match, and the statistic, though, for the match could be very different in terms of the strength of that? Is that
Correct.
right? So, for example, you can have a match, and the statistic could only be 1 in 2. Is that right?
That's correct.
That is very different from a match where you have a statistic of 1 in 1 quintillion. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And so essentially the purpose of providing the statistic, like you said, is to give weight to any sort of inclusion or match.
Correct.
Now, as human beings, how much of our DNA is the same? In other words, how much DNA do we all share with one another?
Over 99% of our DNA is similar between individuals.
And is that why we all have, for example, 2 eyes, 2 ears, nose, etc.?
That's one way of saying it.
So if so much of our DNA is the same, and I know you touched on this before, but if so much of our DNA is the same, then how is it that forensic DNA analysis is able to be used as a tool of comparison?
Yeah, so we have a small region of our DNA that is useful in distinguishing individuals from each other, and that was those short tandem repeats that I was talking about. So that those regions of your DNA are different from one another for enough. Their difference is enough for me to be able to say whether someone matches or doesn't match, and then a statistic if needed.
So when you're talking about DNA analysis, are you looking at that little small region that's different among all of our DNA?
That's correct.
And is there a lot of variability among individuals within that very small region that you use for DNA analysis?
There's enough variability for me to make those distinguishing between individuals.
Now, I think you said it, but when you do DNA analysis, you're targeting specific non-coding regions within that within that small percent. Is that right?
So I didn't specify that, but those short tandem repeats are in regions of our DNA that are not coding for any particular function.
When you say repeats, what does that mean?
Yeah, so when I was talking about the short tandem repeat, you can kind of think of it as like beads of a necklace. Some necklaces might be longer than others, so one necklace might have 11 beads, one necklace might have 12 beads, one might have 20 beads. So what your repeats are, just a block of repeats. So I'm counting the number of repeats of a segment of sequence. So let's say your sequence is just, for example, ABCD. That sequence is repeated 14 times, 15 times, 16 times. So that's the variability between people. I can detect the number of repeats at several different locations across your DNA.
Now, how many repeats do we all have at a particular area?
I am not sure I
I'm
understand.
sorry. Let me ask you it this way. What is an allele?
Allele is a different form of a gene. In terms of STR testing, we're going to refer to the allele as the number of repeats. So at one particular location, you could have anywhere ranging from 10 to 20 repeats. So if you had 10 repeats, I will say you have the 10 allele at that location. If you have 15 repeats, you have 15 allele at that location.
And when we talk about a location, is that called a loci?
Loci is plural, locus is singular.
Okay. So at each we'll call it each locus, we all have 2 alleles. Is that right?
Correct.
Is one inherited from mom and one inherited from dad?
That's correct.
And just to be clear, are you looking at that small percentage, that small region where we all differ to look at the alleles that are present?
Correct.
Okay, so for example, at a particular locus, you might be a 13 and a 14, and I might be a 1 and a 2. Is that right?
Correct.
And then do you look at, is there a certain number of loci that you look at in DNA testing?
Yeah, so the kit that I'm using in my testing tests 27 different locations.
And that loci, is that a predetermined set of locations that you're always looking at in each and every DNA analysis?
The kit we're using, they are the same set of 27 locations.
Now, before we move on, can you explain the difference between a single source sample of DNA and a contributor?
Yes. A single source profile is one in which there's only one contributor. I would only expect it to be 2 alleles at every location tested. In a mixed sample is when there's more than one contributor. There could be 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, and so forth and so on. And that's indicated by the presence of 3 or more alleles at any particular location.
Now, within a mixture, is there sometimes something called a major and a minor profile?
There is.
What is that?
So when I'm analyzing my data and looking at profiles, I can make a determination of the number of contributors in there. And based on one person's contribution of DNA to the others, there could be times when I can separate out those components. So someone who has more DNA would have a major contribution, they'd be the major contributor. If someone had less DNA, they'd be the minor contributor.
Now, I want to talk about how you go about generating a DNA profile from either a piece of evidence or a buccal swab. So in very general terms, are there essentially two parts to the process of DNA analysis?
You're talking about in the way I generate a profile?
I guess I'll ask it this way. Is there a laboratory process?
Yes, there is a 4-step procedure to generate a DNA profile in the laboratory, and that is the same for both the reference material or any evidentiary material. The first step in that process is extraction. That's getting those cells off the substrate, for example, a piece of clothing, breaking open those cells and releasing the DNA into solution. The second step is quantification. That is determining how much DNA was extracted. The third step is amplification, and this is a technique. In the amplification, we're using a technique called PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. So what we are doing in PCR is essentially xeroxing the DNA to produce many copies so it can be detected, because in its initial stage it's undetectable. So I'm producing many copies of those targeted locations to generate a profile through this PCR reaction. So once I developed enough DNA through that amplification process, we go to the fourth and final step, which is detection. And this is where the amplified product goes into a machine called a genetic analyzer, and it separates all those different amplified locations and puts it in a readable format for me to interpret.
Now, what is an electropherogram?
An electropherogram is that readable output of data of a DNA profile. It contains all the essentially peaks or signals of all those locations that I tested.
So is it fair to say that that 4-step laboratory process ends with the culmination of the electropherogram?
Yes.
Once that is done, so once you have your electropherogram, what is the next step in the process of DNA analysis once your profile is generated?
Once my profile is generated, and I have data, the next would be determined is if I generated a profile, is there a profile? Can I interpret this profile? Is there a single source or mixed sample here? If I have evidentiary samples, I will do the same thing. And then if I have profiles for both evidence and reference materials, I will make comparisons to those profiles and present my findings in a report.
Now, how do you as a DNA analyst look at that electropherogram and make a determination as to the number of contributors?
I was kind of talking about this earlier with mixtures. So in cases where I only observe 2 alleles at every location, it's an indication that it's single source or just one person present here. When there is more than 2 alleles, it's an indication that there's a mixture of more than one individual. So when we are talking about inheriting DNA and you get half your DNA from your mother and your father, I would expect 1 allele from your mother and 1 allele from your father. So if there was only 1 person in this sample, I would expect 2 numbers at every location tested. So when there's a mixture, you have another person involved, so you could have potentially 3 or 4 in a 2-person mixture, and they just get more and more presence of alleles as the number of contributors increase.
Now, earlier we were talking about the statistic and the importance of a statistic. Is there something at the New Jersey State Police Lab called source attribution?
There is.
And what is that?
So when I have a match and I do a statistic, it gives a number of a 1-in number. So if someone matches, I report out that statistic. When someone is a source, that statistic has to reach a certain threshold. At the time of this report, that statistic is 1 in 7 trillion. So whenever I have a statistic that crosses that 1 in 7 trillion threshold, I am able to say they're the source of that profile. So they still match, but it's a higher match of saying they're the source. And what that means is, it is my opinion, when someone's a source of a DNA profile, it's their profile to the exclusion of anyone else.
So essentially, when you say somebody is the source, that is the strongest statement you can make as far as inclusion. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, for each case that you get assigned to and work on, do you prepare a report?
I do.
What does that report include?
That report includes several things. There's a header on the report that contains information as the case number, the agency case number, the submitting agency name and address, the laboratory address, the date of the report, the evidence received, and then any conclusions that I make about it as well.
And in this particular case, were all of your reports peer-reviewed?
They were.
Now, before we move on to the work that you performed in this case, could you explain some of the limitations to DNA analysis that were present back in 2018 at the time you worked on this case?
Yeah, so some of the limitations are largely due to the quality and quantity of the DNA sample. So the tools I had at my time were affected if there was poor quality or very low level DNAs. It also was affected by the number of contributors, the statistics I could do, or interpretations or deconvolution of mixtures weren't possible once I got about 3 contributors. The field has moved into technology that can account for those limitations now.
Now, at the time, if you came across a DNA sample that was either a mixture that was too complex or DNA that was just too low, what, if anything, would you do?
So I would acknowledge that a result was obtained. I would state something that no conclusions will be reached concerning this profile about any contributors due to the quality or quantity of the profile.
Now, turning to the present case, were you assigned to perform DNA testing and analysis on certain items of evidence relating to State of New Jersey versus Paul Caneiro?
Yes.
Now, were there 2 case numbers under which you performed your analyses in this case?
There was.
Okay. And did the work that you performed include items under each case number?
It did.
Okay, I'd like to try to go through this chronologically with you. So I'm going to show you what's been marked as S476. All right, do you recognize S476?
I do.
And what is that?
S476 is a copy of a report. It's a 1-page report for laboratory case number C18-10138, and the report is dated 11/27/2018.
The items on the report, are they listed as items 1 through 5?
It's 1 through 4, then 5-1.
Sorry. And then what are the other items listed?
7-1, 9-1-1, 9-2-1, 9-3-1, and 9-4-1.
Now, items 1 through 4, what are those?
Items 1 through 4 were reference materials. Item 1 was a reference material for Jennifer Canero. Item 2 was a reference material for Jesse Canero. Item 3 was a reference material for Sophia Canero. And item 4 was a reference item for Keith Canero.
Okay, and were DNA profiles developed for each of the 4 individuals?
They were.
And was that for comparison purposes?
That's correct.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as S477. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And what is that?
S477 is what is called a DNA worksheet for laboratory case number C18-10138.
Okay, and then does it list each individual on there as number 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Correct. It contains items 1 through 4, which were those reference materials I just described.
So Jennifer is what number?
Jennifer is number 1.
Is 2.
Jesse Canero.
3.
Keith Canero. Sophia Canero.
And 4.
Keith Canero.
So when you developed the profiles for each of the 4 victims, did you essentially have to develop electropherograms?
That's
For
correct.
each of them? I'd like to use this just as an example. I'm not going to do this for each item, but I'm going to show you what's been marked as S478. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And what is that?
S478 is 2 pages. It is an electropherogram for item number 3 from case number C18-10138.
So is that Sophia Canero's electropherogram?
That's correct.
So essentially that is her DNA profile.
Correct.
Do I have permission to publish?
Any objection?
No, thank you.
Okay, you can.
Thank you. Can we have the back table, please? Okay. Sir, what you see on the screen here, can you just explain to us what we're looking at? Maybe it'll help just to see it. You explained an electropherogram before, but just to see it in context.
Yeah, so this is the first page of the electropherogram. I don't know if you guys can necessarily see these dark banners at the top, if you can see the writing.
Sir, what we're going to do is, I don't mean to cut you off, we're going to give you a stylus, and you can use that. Yeah.
So, I just touch it, or
Yeah.
is that working? Okay, oops.
You could
Okay.
just, you can do it on the side button.
So if you look, okay,
It's right over here, one of
Oh,
the
I
side
do?
buttons. You can
Okay.
do, yeah. Thank you.
technology, guys. Okay, so we're zoomed in right now. So if you see this top banner up here,
Just do it on your screen, because if you try to do
I am.
both-
It's just not. I can't tell if it's doing anything. Okay. So right where I put that little hash mark, that top banner going across that page, which they're kind of shaded out, is all the different locations I'm testing. So these are just representative of the first grouping of locations. So these are those different loci that, or locus, singular, that I'm testing to generate a DNA profile. If you go below that, you'll see a peak with numbers underneath of it. So there's a peak there, and then there's numbers under here. That first one technically isn't a number. That's called a melogenin. That's the sex-determining chromosome. So XX would be female, XY would be male. So you see one single X here, technically two X's, because you got an X from each parent. So that this profile is female. If you move to that next location, you can see there's a 15 here. So this is a location where someone has 15 repeats from each parent. Next location.
Can I just ask you, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, why is there only one peak there if we get two alleles from each parent?
Yeah, so you get two alleles from each parent, but they are common alleles. There's a range of only potential numbers you can get at a particular location, like from 11 to 20. So you could share the same allele from each parent, so it's just only going to be represented one time. In a table format, I would write this down as a 15-15, but it's only given one signal because only a 15 repeat was observed at this location. So there's a single allele here representing both from each parent. That next location, you can see there's actually two, so they got a 16 from one parent and a 17.3 from the other parent. So what you see here as you go across, there's a set of peaks that represent your DNA profile at a particular location. And when I interpret this profile, I put it into a table format saying at one particular location, that first one you're 15-15, that second one you're 16-17.3, and going and so forth across every location. I just notate those numbers in this single source profile.
Thank you. Now, if there was another contributor here, what would you expect to see?
I'll try to draw this in for you towards the other end of the table or electropherogram. You would see potentially 4 peaks, maybe 3 peaks. So I would expect to see a third peak somewhere in this profile, if not at multiple locations, that indicate the presence of another contributor.
Okay. But just to be clear, this is Sophia Canero's single source, that's her profile.
Correct.
Thank you. Judge, can we preserve this?
Sure.
Are
This
we
is
raised-
478.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want me to draw them back in?
If you can,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
So, there.
It has to be exact.
Okay, I'm sorry
No,
about
I'm just
that.
kidding.
I
I know
think
what
that
you
was
mean.
really mostly what was important. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right, we're going to, 478.1.
Thank you. Put it down.
Now you can undo it.
Yes or no?
Yes, you're good. Thank you.
I'm going to show you, you mentioned an allele table.
Yes.
So that electropherogram, the DNA profile on there, does that get converted over into an allele table?
That's correct.
Does that just make it easier to look at, essentially?
Yes, it makes it easier to look at and then to compare profiles from evidentiary to reference materials.
I'm showing counsel S479. I'm going to ask if you recognize this.
I do.
And what is that?
So S479 is the allele table I generated for case number C18 10139 for references 1, 2, 3, and 4.
So is Sophia Canero's allele table listed under number 3 there?
Yes, her profile's under number 3.
Okay, and just for pedagogical purposes, Judge, permission to publish this. S479.
Mr. Murray?
No, Judge.
Okay, you can.
Okay. So if you could point out to us where you see Sophia's allele chart. Now, do you see where it says on the side there's like a row under specimen numbers?
Yes.
Are each of those a locus?
Yes.
Okay, so each of those represents a location on that small percentage of DNA that differs among all of us. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so now at the first locus, how do you say that?
Melanogenin.
Okay, what is Sophia?
And XX.
And is that mean she's a female?
Correct.
Okay, so for example, if we look over at victim 4, which is Jesse, he's what?
An XY.
And that would represent what?
Male.
Okay. And just to, if you could explain, just to, where we look at D3S1358, that locus, what is Sophia?
1515.
Okay, and this essentially, you go down the line, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I want to keep this up, but if we could go back to your report. Can you please go through, we went through numbers 1 through 4. What are the rest of the items on there?
I'm going to refer to my report. That's
You
fine.
can. Just the one, like,
Thank you. Item 5-1 was a portion of a swab of a handle from a knife. Item 7-1 was a portion of a swab of a handle from a knife. Item 9-1-1 was a portion of a sample from the blade of a knife. Item 9-2-1 was a portion of a sample from the blade of the knife. Item 9-3-1 was a portion of a sample from the blade of a knife. Item 9-4-1 was a portion from swabbing from a handle of a knife.
Now, items 1 through 4, the reference samples. Next to that where it says comments, what does it say under those comments for each of them?
Results obtained.
Okay. And then what about item 5-1, the swab of the handle from knife? What is the comment there?
Results obtained.
Okay. What does that mean, results obtained?
That means I got some kind of data, some kind of profile for that item.
Okay. Now, when you have results obtained, it doesn't necessarily mean you're able to make any comparisons, right?
Correct.
But you've got some DNA from it.
Correct.
Now, items 7-1 through all of the 9s, what does it say under comments?
No results.
Okay, what does that mean?
That means I generated no DNA profile for these items.
Okay, so aside from the 4 victims' buccal swab or FTA cards, the only results you got were from item 5-1, the portion of the handle from the knife. Is that right?
Correct.
Was there an allele chart created for that? That evidentiary sample 5-1?
Yes.
Okay. And prior to that, did you have to, obviously your work, did that culminate in an electropherogram?
It did.
I'm showing counsel what's been marked as S480. I'm showing you what's been marked as S480. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What is that?
S480 is the allele table I generated for item 5-1 for laboratory case number C18-10138.
Okay. So if you could, can you explain to us, let me ask you this first. When you generated your profile or the profile on 5-1, what did you do with it after that profile was generated? So in other words, after you had your electropherogram?
So once I had my electropherogram, I determined, was there DNA present, the number of contributors, is this single source or mixture, is this profile interpretable?
Okay, and was it?
Yes, it was.
What, if any, comparisons did you do?
So I took the profile generated from 5-1 and compared it to any reference material that was available for this case.
Okay, so just to be clear, you compared that profile from 5-1 to Jennifer Canero's profile?
Correct.
And each and every of the 4 victims, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, what, if any, conclusions did you make?
Yes, I'm going to refer to my report if that's fine.
Okay, just tell us the number.
Yes, so for State Exhibit 476, with regards to item 5-1, my conclusion was that the STR DNA profile of Sophia Canero matches the STR DNA profile from item 5-1. The calculated frequency of the STR DNA profile is 1 in at least 726 million for randomly selected unrelated individuals. I also concluded that Jennifer Canero, Jesse Canero, and Keith Canero are excluded as possible contributors to the DNA STR, as possible contributors to the STR DNA profile obtained from item 5-1.
Can you, by using this allele table, can you explain how you would exclude somebody from the profile on the evidentiary sample?
Yes. So what I do is I will look at the evidence profile, which you can see that's displayed up here. So for example, if you look at this second location, that is D3S135E, item 1 was a 1517, and the reported profile for item 5-1 was a 1515. In a single source sample, I only need one of these numbers to differ to exclude. So in the case of the evidence at the 1515, that reference has that 17, so it's not consistent with that individual location. And I do that at every location that I generated a profile to see how they match or don't match to determine if they include or exclude. Now, on the other side of that, if someone matches, you can see that in reference number 3, I have a 1515 for that type, and my evidentiary sample is a 1515. So at this location, they're matching. And then I would go down through the rest of the developed profile to see how they match or do not match.
No, I'm going to leave that with you just to conclude on this particular, on your report, you included, your conclusion was you included Sophia Canero on 5-1.
Yes.
And you gave a random match probability of at the 1 in at least 726 million.
Correct.
Just to keep everything together.
All of them?
Yes. Thank you.
We're going to print what's on the screen, which is S480.1.
I'm going to show you 479.
479. Sorry about that. 479.1.
I'm going to show you what has been marked as S411 and S481. Starting with S481, do you recognize that?
I do.
And what is that?
481 is a 2-page copy of the report I generated for laboratory case number C18-10139. It's dated 11/27/2018.
And what is, do you recognize S411?
I do.
And what is that?
S411 is the evidence receipt. It is 2 pages for case number C18-10139. That is dated as received 11/23/18.
We can take this off the screen. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask if you could look at your report, item 1-1-1. Do you see that?
I do.
What is that?
It's a portion of a swabbing of a glove.
And what does that correspond to on the evidence receipt?
Item number 1.
What is that?
Item number 1 is a burnt nitrile glove, black.
Okay. And were any results obtained?
Yes.
Can you explain?
With regards to item 1-1-1, the STR DNA profile was not of sufficient quantity or quality for comparison purposes.
What does that mean?
So So the data, the profile generated didn't meet the laboratory's procedures, protocols to do a comparison, so I was not able to make any conclusions to anyone's contribution to that profile.
Okay, if we could go to item 2-1. What is that?
That is a portion of a swab from the left side of front door frame.
What does that correspond to on the evidence receipt?
Item number 2.
And is that essentially the same description?
Yes, it is.
Okay, were results obtained?
Yes, they were.
And what were those?
With regards to 2-1, Jennifer Canero, Jesse Canero, Sophia Canero, and Keith Canero are excluded as a possible contributor to the DNA profile obtained.
Now, does this end up coming back to firefighter Sean Edson later in another report? And if you're not sure, I'll show you that report later.
Don't remember off the top of my
Save
head.
the suspense, okay. Item 3-1, what is that?
3-1 is a portion of the swab of foyer wall.
And what does that correspond to in the evidence receipt?
Item 3 with the same description.
Okay, any results?
Yes, results were obtained.
Okay, what were those?
For item 3-1, Jennifer Canero, Jesse Canero, Sophia Canero, and Keith Canero are excluded as a possible contributor to the DNA profile from item 3-1.
What is the next item that you have on your report that you tested?
6-1-1-1. That is a portion of the staining of a front left thigh area of jeans.
Now, on the evidence receipt, does that correspond to item 6?
It does.
Okay, and that just says one paper bag of chart articles.
Correct.
Now, all of your number 6s are going to correspond to what was in that bag, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, we'll just have sub-numbers for each item that was in the bag.
Correct.
So 6-1-1-1 is the portion of the staining of the jeans that you just read, is that right?
Correct.
What, if any, results were obtained?
With regards to 6-1-1-1, the STR DNA profile obtained is not of sufficient quantity or quality for comparison purposes.
The next item is what?
6-1-2-1.
And what is that?
That's a portion staining of front left shin area of jeans.
Were results obtained?
They were.
And what were those results?
With regards to 6-1-2-1, Sophia Canero is identified as the source of the STR DNA profile obtained.
Okay, now, I see that there's no statistic there, is that correct?
There's no statistic directly under this conclusion statement. It is covered by a footer at the end of the report.
And again, why is that?
So with regards to source attribution, I have to cross the statistic of 1 in 7 trillion, and that's always going to be the same number. So we just have that listed as a footer at the bottom of the report. Whenever source is mentioned, it's referenced at the bottom of that report.
And here, are you identifying Sophia Canero as the source?
That's correct.
What is the next item?
6-1-3-1, that was a portion staining of front right thigh area of jeans.
The results obtained.
They were.
And what were they?
With regards to 6-1-3-1, Sophia Canero is identified as the source of the STR profile obtained.
How about 6-1-4-1?
That is a staining of the front right shin area of jeans.
Were results obtained?
They were.
And what was the conclusion of that?
The STR profile obtained from 6-1-4-1 was not of sufficient quality or quantity for comparison purposes.
What is the next item listed?
6-1-5-1, that was a portion of staining of rear left calf area of jeans.
Were results obtained?
They were.
And what was the conclusion?
Sophia Canero is identified as the source of this STR DNA profile obtained from 6-1-5-1.
And again, just to be clear, no statistic is given because these have actually reached source attribution, is that right?
Statistic is given, but it's in the footer of that report.
How about the next item? What is that?
6-1-6-1, that was a portion swapping of inside waistband of jeans.
Any results?
No results were obtained.
Now, what is the next item?
6-2-1-1, that's a portion staining of front right shoulder area of t-shirt.
Okay, any results?
Yes.
And what was that?
Jennifer Canero, Jesse Canero, Sophia Canero, and Keith Canero are excluded as a possible contributor to item 6-2-1-1.
Did your report mention anything about any further comparisons? Or anything being needed for further comparison?
Yes.
What is that?
So on page 2, I stated that no conclusions can be reached concerning another possible contributor to the STR DNA profiles obtained from the items examined without submission of a buccal swab reference.
I'm sure my counsel has been marked as S482 and S483. I'm going to show you the same, and if we could start with S482, what is that, if you recognize it?
I do. S482 is the DNA worksheet I generated for laboratory case number C18-10139. It is item 20, and it's a reference sample from Paul Caneiro.
From Paul Caneiro?
Correct.
And what is the date on there? Or is there a date?
The date on my worksheet is 11/27/18.
Okay. S481, do you have that in front of you?
Yes.
All right, and do you recognize that?
S481 is the report I was just talking about for C18-10139 that was dated 11/27/2018.
Actually, I should ask you, what is item 20? What is that listed as?
So, item 20 was from State Exhibit 483, which was a report I generated for C18-10139. That report date is 11/29/2018, and that is for item 20, the DNA reference from Paul Caneiro.
Okay, are there any conclusions on that report made by you?
There are.
What is that?
Paul Caneiro is identified as the source of the STR DNA profile obtained from items 6-2-1-1 and 7-1-1. I also concluded that Paul Caneiro is excluded as a possible contributor to the STR DNA profile obtained from item 2-1 and 3-1.
Okay, now you indicated that Paul Caneiro was identified as the source of the STR DNA profile obtained from 6-2-1-1. Can you just remind us, what is that?
So that is a match or a conclusion, and the statistic for that source attribution is when it reaches that threshold of 1 in 7 trillion.
But in what item is that?
Oh,
Just to remind us, we've been going through the lot. That's okay.
The item 6-2-1?
Yes.
That is the swab, the portion staining of front right shoulder area of the t-shirt.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to show you what's been marked as S484 on the showing pencil. Do you recognize this?
I do.
What is that?
S484 is a copy of a report I generated for C18-10138. It's dated 11/29/2018.
Okay. What, if any, conclusions do you make in that report?
I concluded that Paul Caneiro is excluded as a possible contributor to the STR DNA profile obtained from item 5-1.
Now, 5-1 was what you previously concluded or made conclusions as to. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that was specifically the handle of the knife. Is that right?
Correct.
If we could go back now and go through, finish the items on your report S481. We finished off, or we left off with item 6-2-1-1, which was the front right shoulder of the t-shirt, which you already told us about. Can we take a look at the next item underneath that?
Yes.
And what is that labeled as?
6-2-2-1. That is a portion swabbing of inside collar of t-shirt.
Any results obtained?
Yes.
And what was that?
The STR DNA profile obtained from item 6-2-2-1 is not of sufficient quantity or quality for comparison purposes.
And just to be clear, 6-2-2-1, that same T-shirt that you previously got results from the shoulder on?
Correct.
What is the next item in your report listed?
6-3-1-1-1-1.
And what is that?
A portion of a sample of a glove.
Okay. And again, this is, just to be clear, it's from item 6, so it's that pile.
Correct.
Were results obtained?
They were.
And what are those results?
A mixed STR DNA profile consistent with at least 2 contributors was obtained from item 6-3-1-1-1-1. Assuming 2 contributors, Sophia Canero is identified as a source of the interpreted major STR DNA profile. The minor STR DNA profile is not of sufficient quantity or quality for comparison purposes.
Okay. What is the next item listed?
6-3-1-1-2-1.
And what is that?
It's a portion swabbing of inside of glove.
Any results?
No results.
What is the next item listed?
6-3-1-2-1-1. Portion swabbing of glove.
Any results obtained?
Yes, they were.
And what were they?
The STR DNA profile obtained from item 6-3-1-2-1-1 is not of sufficient quantity or quality for comparison purposes.
What is the next item listed on your report?
I think we're at 6-3-1-2, 6-3-1-2-1-1.
Okay, and what is that?
That's a portion swabbing of glove.
Okay, any results?
We just did.
Yeah, I think we.
Okay, so we want.
That was the
Just
one.
did.
My fault, I apologize.
Is it,
Got it all on my head right here.
I'll ask you this. Is the next item 7-1-1?
It is.
Okay, what is that?
That is a staining of a bandage.
Okay. Any results obtained?
Yes.
And what is that?
Jennifer Canero, Jesse Canero, Sophia Canero, and Keith Canero are excluded as a possible contributor to the STR profile obtained from 7-1-1.
Now, just in looking at the corresponding evidence receipt, just to be clear, is this a bandage that was obtained from the center console cup holder of a car?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, if you can go and look back and look at S483, which is your report dated 11/29/18, do you see that?
I do.
Okay, and the number is 10139. What does that, your report, indicate with respect to the results of 7-1-1?
Paul Caneiro is identified as a source of the STR DNA profile obtained from item 7-1-1.
Okay, and finally, item 8-1-1 on your report. What is that?
That's a portion swabbing of glove.
And if you could look at the evidence receipt and just explain what that is, if there's any further explanation of that glove.
So this is from State Exhibit 411. Item 8 is a piece of black glove from rear passenger seat, driver's side, NJ Reg DCJ 3105.
Any results obtained from that?
No results were obtained.
So just to recap from this particular report, you had Sophia Canero as the source of the DNA on the front left shin of the jeans, the
Correct.
front right thigh of the jeans,
Correct.
the rear left calf of the jeans,
Correct.
and on one of the black nitrile gloves. Is that right?
Correct. I'm just going to...
I don't have a specific objection, but I'm just going to say that obviously these are all leading questions that are coming from the state's direct.
Okay. I agree that they are leading. However, I'm going to allow it based on the fact that just trying to get through these numbers sequentially and making sure that the jurors can understand it, I'm going to allow the leading form of these questions for now. Obviously, when we get beyond this, Mr. Murray, if you want to stand up again and object, I'll make sure that I listen carefully on that, okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir.
I'm going to show you. Hold on, I'm going to take this back.
Sir, can you just hit the undo on there, if you don't mind? We just have a random circle. Thank you.
Show you what's been marked on show council. First is S485. Do you recognize this?
I do.
And what is that?
S45 is a copy of a report I generated for laboratory case number C18-10138. It is dated 12/4/2018.
And what in particular is that?
This is a report for item 13-1-1, which was a portion of a swab.
The portion of the swab, were there any results obtained from that?
Yes.
And what were those?
My conclusion was the YSTR DNA profile from item 13-1-1 is not of sufficient quantity or quality for comparison purposes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as S486. Showing counsel. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What is that?
S486 is a copy of a report I generated for laboratory case number C18-10139, dated 12/4/2018.
And what does that indicate?
This is for item 15-1-1, which was a portion of a swab.
Are there results?
No results were obtained.
No results. Okay. I'm going to show you what has been marked as S487, showing counsel. Do you recognize this?
I do.
What is that?
S487 is a copy of a report I generated for laboratory case number C18-10138, dated 2/11/2019.
Okay. Specifically, are there any item numbers listed on there?
Yes, there are.
What is that?
Item 2, the DNA reference from Jesse Canero. Item 4, the DNA reference from Keith Canero. And item 10-1-1, which was a portion swab for E-cells cartridge.
Okay. And the case number on there is, but what is the case number, if you could tell us?
C18-10138.
So we're talking about the cold snap scene, is that correct?
I don't remember off the top of my head the locations.
Were any results obtained nonetheless from that swab?
No results were obtained.
Thank you. Just so we don't mix them up. Finally, I'm going to show you It has been marked as S488. I'm showing counsel first. I'm going to ask if you recognize that.
I do.
What is that?
S488 is a copy of a report I generated for laboratory case number C18-10139, dated 2/11/2019.
Now, the first item that's listed there, can you tell us what that is?
Item 6-1-7-1. It's a portion staining jeans front left thigh area.
Okay, and just to be clear, you said the date on here was 2/11/19?
Correct.
Okay, so was this additional testing from areas of the genes?
Yes.
All right, so 6-1-7-1, portion staining of the genes front left thigh area. Were any results obtained?
There were.
What was that?
A mixed STR DNA profile consistent with at least 2 contributors was obtained from item 6-1-7-1. Assuming 2 contributors, Sophia Canero is identified as a source of the interpreted major STR DNA profile. The minor STR DNA profile obtained is not of sufficient quantity or quality for comparison purposes.
What is the next item listed?
6-1-8-1, that was a portion staining jeans front right shin area.
Were results obtained?
Yes.
And what were those results?
Sophia Canero is identified as a source of the STR DNA profile obtained from item 6-1-8-1.
What is the next item listed?
6-1-9-1, this was a portion staining jeans inside pockets and the knee areas.
Were any results obtained?
No results were obtained.
And what is the last item on there?
6-4-1-1, portion swab of live round.
Okay, any results obtained?
No results were obtained.
Judge, I have nothing further.
Okay, Cross.
When you were making these allele tables for the major contributors that you were looking at, did you make allele tables also for the minor contributors?
I don't believe I did so. I'd have to look at my actual data to see if I did or didn't.
Yeah, okay, because I'm looking at 6-1-7-1. I see a major, but I don't see a minor.
Yeah, so generally, we didn't always report in the allele table the minor alleles that was deemed not useful for comparison purposes, so we didn't list it in the table.
Okay, so places where we've heard you testify, I think it was in 6-3, 6-1-7, where there was not enough information at the time, at least, to engage in further testing. We wouldn't expect to see an allele table for a minor contributor.
That sounds correct.
Okay, got it. And obviously, if we don't know anything about the genetic profile of the minor contributor, we can't make any statements about who is or isn't a potential contributor.
Yeah, based on our protocols, the quality of that profile was not suitable for any comparison, so I'm not saying anyone matches or doesn't match included or excluded. It's just inconclusive.
Right. It could be anybody.
Possibly.
Okay. So let's just go back here. What you were doing here, and this is back in 2018, is this is a more, I don't want to say more traditional method of analysis, but obviously the method of analysis has changed somewhat in your laboratory and laboratories across the world since 2018. Would that be fair to say?
I'm understanding properly. Our procedure of generating the profile is the same. It's the interpretation of that profile that has changed.
Right. Because now there's a computer program that wasn't available in 2018 that is widely used.
It was available in 2018. It wasn't utilized by the state police New Jersey State Police at the time.
You're right. I'm sorry. I misspoke. The state police was not yet using it.
That's correct.
Okay. When you were doing this testing back in 2018, you had to do the analysis and interpretation of these samples. You had to first determine whether there was enough of the sample to engage in further testing, right?
Correct.
And if there was enough of the sample, you had to determine whether it was a single source or whether it was possibly a mixed profile.
Correct.
And mixed profile means that we have reason to believe that there's more than one person who contributed to the sample.
Correct.
And we believe that sometimes based on these electropherograms that we saw today.
Correct.
Right? Because if we see on the electropherogram that there's a place where there should be two alleles and there's evidence of more than two, we know for a fact that more than one person had to contribute to that sample.
Yes.
There's also, we see in those electropherograms, and we saw one electropherogram today, and that was from a direct sample, a reference sample of a person, right?
Correct.
And when we get a reference sample, what we saw in that was that we had a very clear genetic profile coming across the electropherogram, right?
Correct.
And we would expect that when we get a reference sample, because what we're trying to do when we get a buccal swab or a blood draw is get the full profile of the person, right?
That's correct.
And so what we see there is the buccal swab obviously was, or what the swabbing that was done to obtain that DNA was obviously effective. It yielded a full profile.
For the reference materials?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
That is not going to always be the case with evidentiary items.
That's correct.
Because evidentiary items, you could get a DNA sample that's worthy of further testing. There's enough of it. You can reproduce copies of it. You can engage in analysis of it. But it may, even after doing all that, it may not yield a full genetic profile. Right?
Correct.
So there's going to be many loci along which a profile from an evidence sample might be missing information.
That's correct.
And in fact, I think you were shown the allele table that was done, or the amplifications that were done for evidence item 5-1 today.
Correct.
And what we saw in that is, well, first of all, there's an AMP1 and an AMP2, and then there's a consensus table, right?
Correct.
And AMP1 means that's the first amplification that you run,
Yes.
and then you run a second amplification,
That's correct.
and you're gonna look to see where there's consensus between those amplifications.
Correct.
And based on that consensus, there could be consensus or there could be discrepancies, right?
Correct.
And if there's discrepancies, I'm supposing that's going to be an indication that there's going to, that would be a likelihood that there's more than one person that could be a contributor,
Not always.
but potentially.
It could be scenario.
Yeah. In this particular case, when you ran 5-1, you ran it twice, and you have this consensus table for that item, right?
That's correct.
Now, there's numerous places along that allele table where information is missing.
Correct.
And that's not really anybody's fault. It's not a failing of the laboratory necessarily. It's just there wasn't genetic information about those loci that were available from the sample that you tested.
Yes, it's just the nature of the sample.
Right. So you're dealing with what you have, right?
Correct.
And when you get evidence from wherever you get it, and it's brought to you by detectives usually, I'd imagine, right?
Yes.
And they find it at crime scenes or wherever they believe relevant information could be coming from, right?
Correct.
They bring it to you, right?
Correct.
You have no control over the method of its collection.
No,
You don't have any control over the method of its transport.
I do not.
You don't have any control, nor does anybody in law enforcement, of how the items are deposited prior to being found by law enforcement.
I do not, yeah.
And we also, I think, can understand that you have no control over how long an item of evidence sits in a location before being found and collected,
I have no control on that.
and what happens to that item of evidence as it sits there.
Yes.
There's no control over that.
That's correct.
But all of these things are going to potentially impact the results that you could get from an item of evidence in terms of your testing.
Definitely.
And, you know, obviously DNA degrades over time, right?
That's correct.
We also know that DNA can accumulate on items that sit in a particular location for a period of time.
It's a possibility.
I mean, one of the things that happens with our bodies is that we grow new skin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
and it's like a big. They say I think it's like the biggest organ in our body,
I believe so.
and what it's doing is it's constantly regenerating itself, right?
Correct.
And that means we have to constantly be growing new skin cells to regenerate this skin that we carry on the external part of our body, right?
Correct.
But the old ones, the old skin cells, are also constantly falling off of us.
It happens.
We don't really know how often it happens, right?
I'm not aware of that.
But we can surmise that it is fairly constantly happening.
I'm not familiar with the rate of shedding and how it differs between people, so that's outside my area of expertise.
Okay. Okay. But you would agree that it's a pretty, for all people with skin, right? Skin shedding is a phenomenon.
Correct.
And when we shed skin, we wouldn't necessarily be aware it's even happening, right?
Correct.
I mean, we're talking about very small amounts of our body, of our genetic material potentially, flaking off and going wherever they land, right?
Possibly.
You were able, the testing methods back then in 2018, obviously you said that some of these samples were insufficient for further testing. There just wasn't enough of it, right?
That's one particular scenario that could have been a reason.
But even back then, you could get a very, very, very small sample of DNA and potentially magnify that, make copies of it, make it sufficient for further testing, right?
That's possible.
And you know, even back then, I think you were dealing with, in terms of measurements of the amount of DNA you were getting, there's something called picograms, right?
Correct.
And a picogram is what?
Picogram is 1,000 of a microgram, which is 1,000 of a milligram. So these are still very small values. Like think of like granules of salt, essentially. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or so it's 1,000.
smaller than that. Yeah, that. So think of like the starting value at a gram of the salt, and then smaller than that. Excuse me.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's 1,000 of a gram of salt.
That's
1,000 of 1,000.
of 1,000.
Right. So we're talking about a very, very, very small quantity from which we can derive potential information in terms of your testing, right?
Correct.
And from that very, very small quantity, we can potentially determine results like what you were talking about, random match probability, right?
Correct.
On an item. Source attribution.
Yes.
So when we say that, or when you say today that, you know, some items weren't sufficient for further testing because possibly in some scenarios there just wasn't enough of it, I think you would agree with me that as a starting proposition, you can potentially take a very, very small sample of DNA and find that that is sufficient for further testing, right?
Correct.
And when we talk about a picogram or several picograms of a specimen, we're essentially talking about, you know, a handful potentially of skin cells, right?
I forget the number of skin cells to generate a profile, but its number of cells is, I think, if I remember properly, like around 20 cells you need to get a profile.
Okay.
I believe it's around that number.
20 cells. And 20 cells, obviously we can't see a skin cell.
Not to naked eye.
We would need, obviously, magnification to even look at something like that.
Correct.
If we deposited skin cells, 20 skin cells, on an item that we touched, we would never even know that we did that. Right? We wouldn't be able to see it.
Yes.
The DNA that we get from our skin cells is the same type of DNA. It's the same DNA we get from blood, right?
Correct.
There's nothing different about blood DNA than skin cell DNA.
There's not.
And you could get a full profile from skin cell DNA, potentially, right?
Potentially.
And you could get a partial profile from skin cell DNA, right? Now, would you say that it's more likely that you get a full profile from blood DNA versus skin cell DNA?
No, it's just the amount of cells that are there. So it's not easier to get from like a skin cell or blood cell. It's just the quantity of cells that are there that will generate the quality of that profile.
Okay. So, for example, something could be presumptively looked at as blood and yet not be sufficient for genetic testing because of the cell quality in the sample.
Yes.
Now, because we know that shedding of epithelial cells is something that happens universally, obviously finding someone's DNA in their own home would not be an unusual thing, right?
Correct.
And especially finding DNA in places that they regularly occupy in their home, right?
That would not be surprising to me.
And it would be expected that, if we conducted an investigation, let's say, at my house, and we swabbed things, and we swabbed, the kitchen counter, it wouldn't be surprising if my DNA was found there, right?
It would not be surprising.
It would be more surprising if your DNA was found there,
Yes.
because you've never been there.
Exactly.
When items are kind of forced in some way or placed in contact with one another, say two garments, a shirt and a pair of pants, when they come into contact with one another, that contact creates a possibility, does it not, that biological material from one of the items could be transferred to the other?
That's possible.
And we could see that happen where if I had touched a pair of pants, those pants are then brought into contact with the shirt. It's a potential that my genetic information could be transferred to that shirt,
Yes.
even though I never touched the shirt.
It's possible. I'm not an expert in how transference occurs and the rate of that, but any time two objects come in contact, there is a transfer of evidence. It's just whether it's detectable or not.
When you're swabbing, or when you're taking swabs, and you're going to determine whether there's sufficient quantity and quality of DNA to do further testing, you place those swabs in some kind of liquid at some point, right?
I don't swab the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not 100% positive how the serology unit does their swabbing. I don't know if they moisten it first or not, or they directly dry swab. That's something I don't do, so I'm not sure how those protocols work.
Okay. You're aware that fluids like water can facilitate DNA transfer?
Yes.
Because the cells and DNA could be carried by water from an item to another item, right? Yes. And so if items were commingled together and not only touching, but were in that condition and were wet, right? That the idea that both of those items are wet, that they have water covering them, would further facilitate the possibility of transfer.
It's possible.
Now, the length of time that, obviously, we wouldn't know, based on your testing, how long the genetic information or the DNA that you obtained from these samples, we wouldn't have any idea of knowing how long they had been on those items.
Yeah, I have no idea how long anything was on there, how it got there. I have no knowledge of how DNA got on an item, or how, when, or how long it's been there. So that's outside my knowledge. I'm just receiving items in an attempt to generate a profile that was deemed suitable for DNA testing.
Right. So it's obvious, of course, but you know, this is not a statement about whether these items were involved in a crime or not, from your perspective, right?
I have no knowledge of the items and how they were obtained or how DNA was even deposited on them.
Right. I think you also talked a little bit and touched on your laboratory protocols today.
Correct.
And all of that is because you want to ensure that the results that you're getting are reliable, right?
Correct.
And those laboratory protocols are also a significant part of accreditation.
That's correct.
Because if your lab doesn't meet sanitary standards, I would imagine that you'd be at a threat of losing accreditation.
That's correct.
When we're talking about items like DNA that can, in such small quantities, can impact the results of your analysis, you want to be very careful that you're being very thorough in your cleaning of the lab, right?
Correct.
Because, like you're saying, even 20 skin cells were allowed to remain on a laboratory surface. Those could become commingled with an item of evidence that they had nothing to do with, right?
Correct.
And that could potentially bias your results completely, right?
It could change my results and my interpretation. I'm there to develop a profile and interpret it, so.
Right. I think, you know, just the takeaway is that, you know, even minor deviations from lab protocol can have consequences in terms of the low-level nature of DNA samples.
Yes, that's why we have protocols, and that's why I follow my protocols to ensure that my results are reliable and accurate.
Now, you talked about some statistical calculations, and the threshold I think that you had in these reports was 7 trillion.
1 in 7 trillion.
And that this back then you were doing something called random match probability,
Correct.
and that's not really the thing anymore, right?
It's still a statistics that's utilized. I believe being out of the unit for several years too, I'm not as fresh on the current technologies, but it is a statistic that can be used. They are moving towards this probabilistic genotyping that is using the computers and using different types of statistics. So it's still valid. It's still an accurate representation. It's just the trends moving to a different type of analysis and interpretation of statistic.
Gotcha. When we're talking about a random match, what you're basically saying is the expectation that somebody in a given population would share the profile that you're seeing develop through your interpretation of the DNA.
Not exactly worded properly. It's the chance that a randomly person chosen from the population matches that profile.
And a random person obviously would, you know, the assumption there is that we're dealing with unrelated individuals, right?
Unrelated and randomly selected from the population of even all completely randomly selected. So the random selection is the important part,
Right.
as opposed to someone that's not randomly selected, because that will alter the type of statistic you can do.
Because family members obviously share a high degree of DNA between one another.
They share their DNA. There's shared DNA.
And obviously it's not random in that sense. It's inherited from parents,
Correct.
and that's why siblings share DNA, right?
Correct.
And so they're not really, in terms of analyzing of siblings one versus the other, they're not really a random segment of the population. Their DNA is going to be much more closely aligned because they're related to one another.
Correct.
I just wanted to show you 479 that was published previously. If you can see that, okay.
It's fine for me.
It's fine for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Obviously here we have references for 1, 2, 3, and 4. Person 1, 2, 3, and 4, right?
Correct.
And these are associated with Jennifer Canero, Jesse Canero, Sophia Canero, and Keith Canero.
I believe so.
And we see Keith is the last. He's V4.
I don't have it memorized off the top of my head. If that's what you're telling me, I'll take your word for it.
Okay. When these assignments are made, V4, for example, being Keith, does anybody in the lab ever change those, or are they permanent?
So when evidence is submitted to the laboratory, the submitting agencies will fill out these forms and they'll enter the codes. So this V4 means victim 4. So they should be hopefully entered properly, but there is a scenario where they could be changed. Let's say they entered it incorrectly and they put 3 down again for some reason. Like it would be then changed by the staff or the scientist if they noticed, if the front desk didn't catch that mistake.
Okay. So I'm not really talking so much about like mistakes. I'm more just saying if you got reference sample, if reference sample 4 was for Keith Canero, and you're working in this case, you're doing testing, you wouldn't change Keith to reference sample 3 from reference sample 4, right?
No, no.
You would always keep him as reference sample 4.
Correct.
And you would expect that even if you weren't the only analyst working on this case, that all the analysts would also keep Keith as reference sample 4, right?
Correct.
Right. Now, in reference sample 4, we obviously see that Keith is an XY, right?
Correct.
And there we see towards the bottom, there's 3 markers that begin with DY.
Yes.
And those DYs, those are YSTR?
That's correct.
Okay, so now with those are a little different than the other DNA we talked about today, because that DNA, a male would inherit specifically from his father.
Yes.
And we would expect that, for example, if my father, I would inherit the same YSTR profile that he has.
That's correct.
So if Keith is 4 and Jesse was 2, and Jesse is Keith's son, we would expect that they have the identical YSTR profile, right?
Yes. So for YSTR profiles, the maternal line is how it's inherited. So father, son, brother, uncle, nephews would all have that same YSTR type since it's inherited down the male line there.
Right. Right. Okay, so that's thank you for that. Right. So that indicates why Jesse and Keith have the same profile at each of those locations, right?
For those YSTRs, correct.
Right. And then, as you said, we would also expect that any siblings of Keith that share the same father would have that identical YSTR profile.
Correct.
Now we see here that these you said there were 27 total locations previously that you do testing on, right?
Correct.
But if we take out those YSTR locations, then we have essentially 24, right?
Correct.
And then if we take out the amelogenin section, we're at essentially 23.
Correct.
Okay. And obviously where we see here, where Keith is a 15, 17, those are the alleles at that location, the D3S location, whatever that number
Yeah,
is.
that's
right?
his gene. That's his type. His number of repeats he has from each parent at that location.
Okay. And what's the significance of these these letters and numbers here?
So we were talking about the locations on different chromosomes, so loci, locus is singular. So D is a designation for on chromosome 3, and then at point location 1, I think it says 135, to say 8 after that, it's a little blurry on my screen. So it's just saying on this chromosome at this location is where I expect to find that essentially G or STR.
Okay.
It's just a designation of the location on the chromosome where this is found.
And all the testing in this case, in terms of these locations, the laboratory used these same exact locations, is that right?
Yeah, so this is in the amplification process, we have a kit that's given to us by a supplier, and that kit has all these locations, so that's the same kit that's used for evidence or references, and we're amplifying all these same locations every time I did an amplification.
Okay, thank you. Judge, I don't think I have any further questions.
Okay. Redirect.
Two quick things. Sir, you just heard on cross-examination, and you discussed how family members share some alleles.
Yes.
Now, in the instances in this case where you were able to conclude that Sophia Canero was the source of the DNA on certain items, were you able to exclude her brother Jesse?
Yes,
And how about her mother and father Jennifer and Keith?
they were excluded.
Okay. And then I'm going to show you what's been marked, and you've already seen this S479, the allele table. If we could just publish this. Get on the back table, please.
Any objection to that? No objection to that?
No.
Yeah. Yep, just making sure.
Can you scroll up a little bit? I want to look at VWA. You see locus VWA?
I do.
Okay, and under Sophia, she's the third one over. What are her alleles there?
She's a 1718.
Does she appear to have a mutation at that particular locus? If you look at her parents.
Which ones are her parents again?
1 and 4.
Yes, she does.
Can you circle her VWA alleles?
Yes. Both of them are?
The whole thing?
Okay.
Box. If we could just have this preserved, please.
Did you want the whole box or just the circle of the one?
Oh, just,
Like,
that's fine, just her mutation.
I'm just
So that's 479.1 or 2? 2, that's what I thought. 479.2.
Thank you, I have nothing further.
Mr. Murray?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. Sir, you can step down.